in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Ciara Lakhani. She is the Chief People Officer at Dashlane. Ciara, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Thanks, Christina. Hi, everyone. My pronouns are also she, her, hers. And I have been in the people, or formerly called human resources space, for 19 years now, I think it is. So you can check that out on my LinkedIn if you want the details. But when I was growing up, I actually wanted to be a lawyer, which I know does not sound very fun or very typical. But I grew up in the US, and on all of our tuna fish cans, it would talk about dolphin safety. And I learned about how dolphins would get hurt, and I thought they were cute. And I wanted to be a lawyer to sue the company so that they could have better processes to protect the dolphins. So somehow that makes what I do now not that surprising. But yeah, that was my childhood version of it.
I love that. I love that the tuna can sticks out as like, this is something that I'm going to help fight for. If you fast forward to today, you are leading the people formerly known as HR, as you were talking about, function and team at Dashlane. How do you think your personal journey has really led you up to this point, and specifically at Dashlane too?
Yeah, so after almost 2 decades in the people, or what used to be HR field, I actually was a customer of Dashlane. And Dashlane is a software that helps businesses and their people, or individual accounts as well, as I had at the time, navigate the web safely and securely. It generates your passwords, fills out all your information online. So I was a personal customer of Dashlane when they had reached out to me. And then it was really the combination of how I felt about how they were living their values, in addition to my passion for the tool as a customer myself, that led me to join.
I love that. I think that's a really good combination of you're a customer of the product, the mission of the company, and then the folks that you work with. Why wouldn't you want to join the team? You talked about kind of learning a little bit of kind of everything across industries as well. And something that a lot of folks have been talking about over the past, I can't believe it's now 2 years, has been it's a really perfect time for especially people teams and the business to really not use the phrase business as usual and really innovate and redesign how systems are built. Can you share maybe a couple examples of how Dashlane has innovated in your people strategy? And this could be anything from an initiative or strategy or plan.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think similar to a lot of other organizations, there have been trends that, particularly coming from people who are joining Dashlane and sharing with our team, that people want to see accelerated. And we were already making progress along that path. And then the pandemic came and it really intensified the curve of acceleration of a lot of those trends. So the first one obviously is remote work or work from home. And we had been through 2 iterations of our guidelines on that, trying to liberalize it, trying to give people the ability to move more toward employee choice. And now, as of last July, we are employee choice led. So that means that we'll be a hybrid workforce going forward, which is certainly not perfect. And sometimes people want to be able to predict what their peers will choose to do, et cetera. So we're looking at software to bring more transparency to see what are other people planning to do. But we do believe that it should be employee led. So what works for the person's personal pandemic comfort level, for their personal life, how do they feel they're going to perform best in their job? And as long as they're not in a role such as an IT person who might need to come in all the time and physically help people with computers when they're new hires, then we have an agreement and we make that work across our 3 countries.
That's great. I think that's really important too in terms of choice. I think a lot of people are looking for autonomy and just empowerment in their roles too, and just the opportunity to choose if you come into the office, if you're comfortable, if you want to get out of your apartment a couple of days of the week or wherever you live as well. I also wanted to talk about the kind of the theme for this interview series as well for reimagining company culture. how do you really think about measuring company culture in qualitative and quantitative ways, to say, we're doing a good job, we're making progress here, or this is what we need to improve upon? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think that talking about company culture somehow becomes one of those topics that you wouldn't think was controversial, but somehow if you pay attention to the semantics of how people like to frame it, it can become controversial. So I've talked to a lot of CEOs who, for instance, will say, like, how can we create a better culture? How can I make a culture? And my personal belief is that culture is organic, and the leadership in the company is one of the major factors that influences the culture, but so does the reputation of the company. So does every single person that joins the company, people's moods, things outside of work. So I do think that we have a responsibility to be a positive influence on the culture, but I don't believe in manufacturing a culture. That said, you do want to monitor the culture, see, like, is it healthy? Is it working for people? Particularly for us, where we're very split across 3 different countries. We want to make sure that that's working because there's different views of how people should work together. So we are a big fan of Culture Amp to run engagement surveys. We do that twice per year. It's really simple and intuitive to benchmark ourselves also to other companies, right? You saw in the beginning of the pandemic that a lot of people in the tech industry that we benchmark against were feeling more engaged and happier with their employers. And then there was a bit of pandemic fatigue. And so you see your own company scores dropping, but then you see, okay, others are too. And it has an algorithm that will show you, here are the 3 things that you can consider working on that are likely to positively impact the engagement of the people in the Dashlane community the most. Other than that, because I like that you asked both qualitative and quantitative, it's very important to not, take just data and overread into that. It's important to have a good relationship with the people who are in the organization. So I think it's really listening to people, talking to people, and we're very fortunate that Dashlaners have kind of always naturally had and kept a culture, as the company has grown, of being very forthright and sharing their opinions. So we get a lot of input on that. And then we really make sure that we're using our values as a major driver of the culture, and assessing not only what people accomplished when we're talking to them twice a year in their feedback checkpoints, but also how are they doing things in line with the values? Because it's not, we want to meet this mission any way possible, the ends justify the means. No, it's we want you to follow the values, and we believe in doing that we can still achieve our mission, best achieve our mission that way, and have it be a good and respectful experience for everybody involved, from our other Dashlane employees to our customers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure. I mean, when we're talking about innovation, everyone has a lot of opinions, whether we're hearing them or not. So active listening is so important, and the data points that you talked about. And I want to ask your opinion around what the difference is after you look at all of this kind of data, you talk to folks within the company. What's the difference between a good and great company culture or workplace?
Yeah, it's another good question, that it's like, it's a universal question, but it's you get into semantics of different
Yeah.
people answer it in different ways. And I've been working long enough to have read and been a fan of the time of the Jim Collins book, Good to Great. So that's one way to think of it that people can Google. But for me personally, I guess if I have to choose something, it's not only what's coming across in that book and how you unlock, people's best performance, but also, do people feel better for having been part of this culture? We saw that our culture was a support to people during the pandemic. We see a lot of personal friendships that come out of people's membership in the Dashlane community. And we hope above all that while people are working towards the company mission, that they're growing and developing as people in ways that help them personally and professionally.
I love that. I think it's really important to understand how to help folks grow personally and professionally, especially since we're in each other's homes right now. You really can't separate or silo out the two today. And people are really reflecting on kind of how many hours they're working for the mission of the company and who they're working with as well. You mentioned values earlier too, and I thought it was interesting when I was looking through Dashlane's values. Some of them include inclusivity, empathy, and humility, which I think are really intentional words. What does that really look like in practice in your organization?
Yeah, we did a big process to update our values, because the previous set had been created when it was about 15 people only in France. So now that we're across 3 countries, we kind of surveyed everybody. There was a working team of volunteers. And then when our new CEO came in February, he also worked to kind of put his final spin on it and get feedback from people. So we're still learning what this one means. There's probably not a universal answer. And what we want people to do in living the values is continue to tag experiences and behaviors in the organization as like, oh, this fits this value and this doesn't, right? And learn more about them through that. But my personal take on inclusivity, empathy, and humility is really trying to round out the parts of how people act, right? So we have one which is impatiently ambitious, which everyone can understand that. And this is kind of like a balance to that, and showing that, like, yes, we want to go really hard at getting things done, but you should always keep in mind inclusivity of others, which, you know, has the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging implications, the general implication of, like, are you doing something without including someone that needs to know because of their job title, and enacting with empathy for our customers, empathy for each other, right? Empathy for everyone we interact with, and a lot of humility kind of as a counterweight to kind of that impatiently ambitious value that we have also.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the point you brought up with not only internally with your team and employees, but also customers and vendors that you work with, and just the holistic, well-rounded individual too. You can see that in a lot of different examples of, you know, the business as well. In terms of inclusivity, and another kind of piece of that is kind of equity as well, and building a workplace where folks feel like they really belong and can do their best work. And modeling that behavior from leadership is also really important, whether that's formal leadership like executives or people managers. So I want to ask, kind of as the leader of the people team, how do you empower folks across the organization to really practice that equity driven leadership or mindset?
Yeah, so that one is it's very multifaceted, because we try to look at all our processes and say, how can we embed, you know, our goals for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into every practice in the company. Certainly that doesn't mean we're perfect. We have a long ways to go. There's a lot of privilege in the backgrounds of our executive team. I myself have a lot of privilege, so can't, you know, best and perfectly speak to all these things, but we try to get a lot of feedback. We try to be very active in the community with other organizations and people from historically marginalized backgrounds to hear what is it that they think should change in business. And we coach each of our managers of people. So each manager of people is coached by a member of the people team at least once per month. Some people opt to be coached more often than that. And we try to embed that into what they're experiencing, what they're saying, right? And for example, if you take our promotion process, we will proactively ask a manager about every single person on the team. Otherwise, research shows that people will think of the people who asked about promotion, and people who will ask about promotion. It's shown that that's correlated sometimes with being white, being male, right? So we want to make sure that everybody is evaluated. And it has been an interesting topic to talk about equity, even when we inserted that into what we used to call diversity, inclusion, and belonging. It's not as popular to use that wording in Europe, and the majority of our Dashlaners are in Europe. So we did get a lot of questions, because it's a very open culture, saying, like, are you just pushing American ideas on us? And for example, in France, the way that diversity is discussed is different, and there's not one view, but there's a historical basis of not tracking people's ethnic background, not tracking people's religion, not talking about the business, the differences, and saying we don't see difference, right? Which is very different from the current view in the US. So we try to educate ourselves on all of that. We take a stand, we educate the managers, and we tell them, you know, feel free to talk back defensively, you know, with us, with your leader, not with your direct reports, because we're asking you, even if you disagree, to commit to this. This is what we've decided makes us a good corporate citizen as a company. We have a long way to go. We sent down an email once where we talked about how we're going to continue to work on dismantling white supremacy within the organization. And my advice would be, don't send that on a Friday if you don't want to talk to some defensive people late into the evening. So it's interesting to see, as everybody has to educate themselves and get uncomfortable and question their own privilege, what comes of that. And we have a lot more ways to go on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that everybody's at a different part of their journey. And I think that cultural, historical context is also important to bring up in these interviews too. What diversity means in Japan is different what it means in France, different in the United States as well. So understanding that and having that common foundation is really important. I know that we have talked about really specific topics around Dashlane strategy, your experience, and how you've innovated, but this next question is vague on purpose. What is the next problem or situation you're currently trying to solve, or what's taking up the most brain space in Ciara's mind right now?
Yeah, so we kind of see ourselves as the people team is trying to solve any problem that's affecting the people working in the company, or how can we help people develop in a way that will help solve a customer problem as well. So I could not narrow it down to one. If I try to take the angle of your question, that's what are we spending the most time on?
Yeah.
I do think right now it's how do we help everybody acclimate to hybrid work, and there continues to be an evolution in the 3 countries of regulations that apply to the pandemic, people's comfort level, socializing or coming into offices, people wanting to resume travel. How do we do that in a way where employee choice truly can lead and people don't feel pressured to travel if they're not personally in that mindset? So there's a lot of time on that, while at the same time looking at continuing like our carbon offset program, which we don't think is enough to stop global warming, but how do we make sure we're trying to do something, and we're calling to people's attention that it should also be part of business to think about the environment, to do something about that. Our donation matching program, which we're picking up for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And then a lot of people's personal development needs and teams' personal challenges at the time, and trying to help them with that so that they can get to the next level of performance.
Absolutely. It sounds like there's a lot of strategic and intentional ways that you're trying to help employees grow professionally and personally in their lives too. I love to hear about the donation matching program, carbon offset, and just different ways that you're helping. And I think there's a lot of customization in a hybrid work setting as opposed to fully remote or back in the office as well. So this is not necessarily related to Dashlane. So just based on your many years of experience in the people space, but are there any common mistakes you're seeing companies making in their people strategy that you would kind of discourage?
Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone who has done the same profession for 2 decades, there's probably tons of things they can point out, and we start to have pet peeves and be like, oh my gosh, again, like, why do people not understand this? But if I had to choose one, I would say it's, our natural human bias, which we all have, to think that others will think as we do. So sometimes an executive team brainstorms what most of their workforce will want, and it's what they would want. And that's not a profile that's representative of their whole workplace. So I think the number one thing to remember to avoid that mistake is everybody is different, and even the same person, what they may have wanted, changes over time. So everything is situational, and we need to remind ourselves not to think through something, oh, this is how I see it, and assume that that's how somebody else will see it. So ask people how they're feeling, ask people what they need, right? And then find a way to make all of that work for the business.
Absolutely. It's that balance between personalization and also scaling what's best for the business as well, and best for the folks that you're working with too. I think that's also really important. So I would also emphasize that as well. And then I guess the flip side of that question also is, based on what you're seeing out in the kind of market today, what is a must-have that specifically people leaders need to incorporate in their strategy to be successful in the future of work and in the current workplace?
Yeah, that's something else, which in a very multifaceted field, also very hard to choose one thing. But I guess I would choose being data driven. And people analytics, which I say not only so that you can scale your decision making to be able to fit the organization at a high level the best, and then personalize from there, but also so that you have the credibility that needs to be maintained with the other business stakeholders, such as CEOs, board directors, CFOs, et cetera. Because when you have that credibility, especially bringing numbers and hard data to it, then when you have to speak about something that maybe doesn't have as much data, you will already have built more credibility and influence in the organization. So I think that's something really important. And there's a lot more software that's coming out there. I'm an advisor for one, but there's a lot more software coming out that makes it a lot easier so that you don't have to sit personally in an Excel sheet for hours doing it yourself.
We love efficiency. We love kind of making the job easier as well. So I think that definitely makes sense too. And really data driven and insights and making sure you're checking in with folks. And going back to the earlier point too of qualitative active listening and quantitative with that data set as well is super important, especially with just the changing workforce that we're seeing too. And people are complicated. So understanding where they are at a given moment. Ciara, is there anything that I either didn't ask that you want to share, or 1 to 2 key takeaways you want to underscore for folks who are listening to our conversation today?
I think your questions were really good, right? And especially you've done many podcasts before this, but 1 or 2 takeaways. I guess, as I said, it's just, make sure that what you think yourself is not what you assume other people think. And so listen to people, understand their needs, and realize that all of that is going to continue to change and evolve. And the pace of change and evolution, I think, for individuals and the way they think and the way they've been experiencing the world has also accelerated along with what business is experiencing. So as someone who in a way has done the same job for 2 decades now, it's, well, every day it's different. And how do we keep changing how we do it? And I think that's something anyone can do. And especially in the people fields, there's a lot of us who are very happy to connect in peer communities and help each other and talk about things. So it's a big community to try to figure out, okay, there's a lot that can be done in this space, and how do you do it?
Absolutely. There's a lot that can be done, and also definitely a believer in that nobody is alone in this work, even if you are the only people person at your team as well. There's a community of folks who have been doing this for many years, who are just starting out as well, where you are too. So reach out to people and see what they're up to as well. Ciara, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thanks, Christina.
And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed on a whole. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.